This account was discovered on a laptop that was found along 36 Highway near Mon, Missouri. It is one of over a dozen entries left by Calvin Bruce, a former St. Louis police sergeant who went missing in 2021. Bruce served with distinction, earning commendations for valor, merit, and community engagement. He was the recipient of a captain's letter of accommodation, and according to this researcher's efforts, was known as an honorable man, even after he lost his position with the department. Addendum: I have done an exhaustive search of both the internet and the Missouri Secretary of State records specifically, and I found zero evidence of a town called Shady Oaks anywhere in the state. There's no city, town, or unincorporated community anywhere near the city of Buckland, as Bruce indicated in his first log. Furthermore, I have driven to the area in question, and there is no perpendicular road before the turnoff into Buckland. Aside from the logs found on the laptop, zero evidence of his whereabouts was ever found on that stretch of 36 Highway. He just vanished. Addendum 2. I investigated some of Bruce's cases and found at least 20 individuals over the course of his career who had actively threatened on record to kill him. That's to say nothing of all of the anonymous threats he's received. It's no wonder he chose not to have a family. They just have been in constant danger. And I can't even imagine worrying about that on a daily basis. If these logs of his are real, then perhaps he was drugged, kidnapped, and taken into some kind of simulation, or perhaps an elaborate theater of some kind. It's a stretch, but in his initial log entry, he himself seemed concerned that whoever had lured him out to Shady Oaks might have been someone he'd de-arrested, or at least connected to his cases in some way. It would explain the why of the how he has so completely disappeared, but still not the how. And it doesn't explain how the laptop wound up just laying on the side of the highway. All of it is just really bizarre. Addendum number 3. I decided to spend a few days in Buckland, which is to say that I stayed in the nearby, somewhat famous town of Marceline because Buckland doesn't have any hotels. I drove around the area extensively. There doesn't seem to be a road anywhere nearby that leads to any town called Shady Oaks. Again, there's no record of a town of that name anywhere in Missouri. Though there is a Shady Oaks nursing home, a Shady Oaks market, and even a Shady Oaks mobile park, but they're all scattered all over the state to the south. Bruce references both Buckland and Marceline in his logs. So if Shady Oaks exists, it must be near these two towns. The elements of cult activity within Shady Oaks supports my earlier theory that Calvin was somehow kidnapped and either drugged or influenced in some way to relate the experiences that he did. Bruce has also a high level of experience with crimes involving or adjacent to the occult, and I wonder if that was a factor in his disappearance. If he were kidnapped by a cult and taken to a secret location hidden deep within the Missouri wilderness, and he were kept in a state of disorientation, that might explain everything but how and why his laptop wound up on 36 Highway. This case is one of the most interesting I've ever worked on, and I admit that I'm becoming obsessed with it. April 21st, 2021. Fourth log entry of Calvin Bruce, Chief of Police, Shady Oaks. It's been a few days here in Shady Oaks, or at least it had been before the latest absolute batshit insanity. After I de-prevented the kidnapping and potential murder of Elifa, Randell by creatures that she called Puckwise, and learned that I likely had nothing to fear from my tick bite, I returned to the town square and went over to the grocery area. I needed to see Lenny and have the other bite on my arm looked at, because while Alafa had told me that the biting little shits didn't have any poison, it still hurt like a underscore. Lenny checked me out and rather than remove bandage, just told me to come back when it fell off or bled through. Apparently, Miss Randall's puses often worked just fine and Lenny was low on antiseptic just then. Rather than waste town resources, I just took it easy for the rest of the day, then went back to her cabin the following morning. But unfortunately, she wasn't there when I arrived. More's the pity. The place looked locked up tight though, so I assumed that she left on her own accord this time. While I was there, I went over and searched the abandoned house where I found the mercy of the weird little dwarves that had bound her. And to my surprise, all of their bodies were gone. Trails of black blood led away from where they'd been and out into the woods in different directions. I can only surmise that they've been taken by predators, but in Shady Oaks, who the hell knows? I thought about following the trails, but no one's in danger that I know of. And walking out into the mists of the woods surrounding Shady Oaks has already been bad for my health. 2 other things were missing from the scene as well. The silver manacles, which, as I recall, weren't handcuffs, but straight up medieval-style dungeon manacles. The key to them was missing as well. The bizarre pentagram-like drawing, which Alafa had been knelt in the center of, seemed to have been deliberately scratched from the wooden floor. I'm glad that I took a few pictures of it before I left the day before. I searched the house thoroughly, but found no other evidence of the puck wedgies or what they were up to. I even checked the basement, but it was flooded. Thank God. Ducking around in an abandoned basement was nerve-wracking at the best of times in the regular, non-bucket-up fog world, when I was just looking for metheads. But the idea of doing so in Shady Oaks while actively seeking out gremlins sounded, in a word, terrifying. I spent the next few days running patrols in town, just kind of walking a beat around the square and through the surrounding neighborhood streets to create a presence. I met a few folks and talked to some of my closer neighbors, but realized quickly that there were probably only about 100 people in town, and almost all of them kept to themselves. Apparently, even in an evil tick-infested shadow dimension, most people still didn't want to talk to the police. Anyway, yeah, last few days have been pretty quiet, and it's given me time to get the lay of the land. At least around the square. I learned the street names, address numbers, and blocks, and more than a few landmarks. There was an abandoned church, which was pretty much a ruin, but that no one knew anything about. An old fenced-in cemetery that had a chain on the outside of the main gate that everyone told me to avoid, but didn't say why, and a burned-down library, which no one would talk about at all. As usual, a lot more questions than answers, but I'll do my best to answer a few of them. There were still a couple of tasks of my assignment sheet too, including checking on a guy Adam told me about named Reggie. He's another sort of the outliers who aren't exactly a part of the main community here, but who still like to come into town to trade and interact. Adam told me that Reggie comes in about once a week and always stops by the cafe before he leaves, but that he's not been seen in some time. Alifa knows Reggie too and explained when she was patching me up that if he's not making a regular appearance, something's wrong. So I'm going to go check in on him once my arm is on the mend. I wanted to be at or close to my best before I traipse off on a day trip. Now, a quick note on the supplies. I decided to go through my car and check anything that might be useful and kind of scored a jackpot. Not only did I find an emergency kit that I'd left in the bag, but I also found a spare box of shells ID had in there the last time I went target shooting. The kit had an extra set of clothes in it, which I really needed. I found the laundromat, which was a bunch of machines with a coin hole busted out, so you could just keep using it as long as there's power, which there was, thankfully. Only having 2 days worth of clothes was a underscore, and washing all of them while standing there in my boxers with a shotgun in hand was awkward to say the least. I also found some flares, a tool bag, and a small first aid kit, which I was just going to give to Lenny, but decided to keep on me in case I run into anyone who needs medical attention. The flares and tool bag I put into the station house along with the rest of the emergency kit, which had another kind of crappy knife and a backup flashlight in it. I left all the car stuff like jumper cables, car tools, and Jack in the SUV because I could immediately think of an instance where they'd be otherwise useful. But if I need to actually drive somewhere, I didn't want to not have them. On to the underscore of the day. I heard my first instance of a human policing today. And by that, I mean this report is regarding the first instance of me having to resolve a dispute between two actual people who lived in Shady Oaks and not, like fight demons and underscore. And let me tell you, I'd rather have screwed with a hisser with only my baton at hand, but we'll get into that. It started with a shout of alarm coming from the grocery store, which was followed quickly by a call over the radio from Lenny asking me to come over. I asked him to advise on the situation, and all he said was that it was the Klan. So I booked it over there thinking it was a bunch of skinheads or something. But imagine my surprise when I see a crowd of people from town squaring off with a group of strangers dressed in patchwork, hooded robes demanding assistance. It took a little while to work out who these new folks were and what they wanted. Apparently, there is a whole other community of people who live a mile or so away from the town square. They're led by someone named Matthew, and they live out in an old abandoned storage facility. They're also apparently, well, let's just face it, they're a cult. They worship trees or something. Druids, I guess you could call them. But whatever, as long as they aren't sacrificing chickens or anything else. Also, this would have been some underscore to let me know about within my first 3 days, Adam. Anyway, this group of them that had come into town were looking for food and supplies, but didn't have much to trade and were kind of begging. This was apparently not the first time this had happened, and the Klan, which was the name the townies gave these people, already owed Lenny and several others from a past exchange, which is why so many in town were ready to get up in arms about it. I spent the better part of an hour calming both sides down and got everyone who was indirectly owed something from the newcomers to beat it so that some kind of arrangement could be made. The kids had an old grocery cart full of junk to trade, but there wasn't much of value. I decided to get involved and traded all their junk for enough of my shotgun ammo, which I now had a surplus of to even them out with everyone. Then I got Lenny to give them what they were asking for, which was mostly food and some candles and underscore like that in exchange for a little more ammo. All told, I only lost 6 shells, and it was a calculated charity, as I reasoned that the ammo would eventually wind up with me later if I needed it. I think Lenny knew what I was doing, but he didn't complain. I also told these kids, because most of them were like teenagers, that the easiest thing for them to trade for was firewood because people in town use it inside for warmth in the houses with fireplaces. But also, Milton pretty much cooks everything on his grill, so he'd likely trade for not having to get his own fuel. It kind of irked me that these kids were out here hawking trash for food. I mean, I wasn't angry at them, but whoever this Matthew was just letting kids running around alone in, well, underscore Shady Oaks. I've got a feeling I'll be having a conversation with him before too long. Anyway, it all got worked out. The Klan got what they wanted. Everyone else felt like they weren't cheated, and I got them all to shut the hell up. I love putting underscore like that into an official log. I had the little kid that was pushing the cart take the whole thing over to the station house so I could sort through it later. And honestly, it was kind of refreshing to deal with some regular cop stuff again, especially after some of the things that I'd seen since I've been here. It reminded me of some of my days in St. Louis, and I remember thinking about how I imagined living in Shady Oaks would be when I got my letter a week or so back. I thought I'd be doing exactly this kind of stuff on a daily basis and getting lunch in Marceline. Well, checking out all the Mickey Mouse stuff. I never thought I'd be dealing with half of the crazy underscore that had happened since I got here. Now, speaking of crazy underscore happening, I'm going to move on from this touching community outreach story to the other 2 very strange things that happened that afternoon as the sun was starting to dip low. I was finishing up another circuit of the streets on the outer perimeter of Town Square, and I spotted some movement near the ruined church I mentioned earlier. Upon investigation, I found that a lot of the church was actually still standing, but the windows and the doors were gone, which made it pretty useless as a shelter. I looked around the ruins for a bit and considered checking out the rectory or whatever that back room is called, but realized as I stepped inside and it got noticeably darker, that night was coming. As I turned to leave, I got the living scared out of me. Usually, when the 12 gauge comes into play, folks tend to kind of pay attention and cooperate, but this guy was real cool. He didn't even move, and it was like he just wasn't afraid of me. I kind of started to freak out a little, wondering if he was crazy or going to draw on me. When he just moved away from the door and went back inside, I immediately followed in pursuit, calling out to him twice, only to get outside and find no one there. I scanned the entire area twice, but didn't find anyone or anything moving at all. And I'm telling you now, I was scared because there's no way he could have moved fast enough for there to be no sign of him. Now, I nervously moved away from the church, deciding that it was time to head back to the station house. And as I did, I just felt like there was something behind me. I spun around to see the figure still standing in the doorway. I still couldn't see him clearly. It was more like a shadow, but he was there. Then something really odd happened that I can't stop thinking about. This figure, he bent his head low and gnawed and tipped the brim of that tri-earner hat at me, and then moved back into the ruins of the church. Oddly, it was like he just ducked inside. But as he did, the silhouette just disappeared and melted into the rest of the shadows inside. I knew instinctively that if I went over to look inside, I wasn't going to find a damn thing. So I stood there for a bit, eyeing the church and half expecting something else to come out, but then just decided to head straight home. There wasn't anyone outside at all, and the walk back seemed kind of eerier than usual, which was odd considering the previous experience. I found myself scrambling with the keys to the station house to get inside. I closed and bolted that door so hard that I thought I was going to break the damn lock. I went around and made a sincere attempt to secure the building, which wasn't hard since I don't really have a back door. But once I was sure that none of the lower level windows had suddenly become supernaturally unbarred, I came back down to the bullpen to write up this log, but paused when I spotted the rickety, rusty grocery cart sitting just inside the front door. I smirked at my new, if mostly useless, acquisition and poured myself a cup of old, burnt coffee from this morning. I then pulled the cart over to my squad desk and started going through it. Now, most of what was in there was just junk. Old pots and pans that were too rusted to use, a couple of dirty ceramic vases, and a bunch of old rusted tools. It was mostly underscore. There was also a lot of weird handmade primitive art made of branches, twigs, and leaves tied together. There was one piece, a mask made from a cut of rough tree bark that looked freaky as hell with big, narrow, sinister eyes and a gaping mouth. Looked like a clown made of vines or something. Hell, I hated it, and I resolved to get it out of the station house the minute the sun was up. There was an old but still sharp axe head that didn't have a handle, which I thought I could fix, but not a whole lot else of much use. Regardless, it was worth it to keep people from hurting each other, at least for a little while. Just as I was taking a look at some of the other rusted tools, I jumped out of my skin when a knock came at the door. I immediately got up and reached for my pistol, which was still on my hip, and eased around the cart towards the main door. Now, I absolutely expected to see the shadowy guy from the ruin, or perhaps one of those puck whatchamacallits here to get revenge for his buddies I perished the other day. What I did not expect to see was the tween who left the very cart I was going through. The kid looked up at me through the barred window of the main door, and his eyes lit up when he saw me. He called out to me softly, like he was trying not to be loud, called me Chief, and begged me to let him in. My instincts told me to get the damn door open as quickly as possible, but every single person I met in town told me to never ever open your door to anyone after dark, even if it was someone you knew. Now, all of those voices were screaming at me to leave my door locked, but the only voice that made an ounce of sense was the kids begging me to let him in. Here's the thing, too. I know someone who is not a cop might one day read this and think that I am crazy for what I did next, but you're not a cop. Not only am I obligated by oath to protect the innocent, but I'm here to tell you that in life, if someone is begging for your help from mortal danger, they generally need it. And so I opened the door and I asked the kid what was wrong as I pulled him inside. But before he could respond, I saw what was wrong. Hanging from the underside of the awning above the door to the station house were a pair of burning red eyes. I heard the hissing before I saw the thing's body, and only just managed to pull the kid to the side as the underscore thing dove on top of me. I only had the presence of mind to shout for the kid to run before my back slammed into the floor of the station house. The force of the impact slammed my elbow into the wooden floor, and I dropped my damn sidearm. The hisser stank and its foul, horrid breath made me want to vomit right there. But I held it together. It had my shoulder pinned, but my other hand was free, so I reached for the only other weapon I could, which was my nightstick. I slid it out of the ring on my belt and whipped it up so hard into the side of the hisser's skull, stopping its teeth from biting only inches from me. My hit stunned it a little, and so I hit it again and again until it seemed it was going to reconsider its current course of action. But that's when I saw the second one, which crawled through the door on all fours and sniffed the air. I panicked as it came through the door, thinking that it was going to finish me off. And I was confused when it slipped right past me and its buddy to head toward the staircase. My fear mounted when I looked that way and saw the kid hiding behind the banister. I shouted at the creature, trying to get its attention, but the hisser ignored me. I then shouted for the kid to run again as my eyes darted around the room for my gun. My attention was pulled back to the one on top of me as it hissed angrily and came back in for another bite. I managed to bring the nightstick up and drive it into the thing as mouth crossways and keep its fangs busy. Now, I chanced to glance back over towards the stairs and I saw the kid dart out from behind them and run into the Chief S office. My heart sank then because there was no way out of that room and very few places for him to hide. I shouted at the other hisser again to try and draw him out to me, but it had locked in on the kid and scrambled over to the door after him. Then, as though to add insult to injury, when I looked back at the hisser gnawing on my nightstick, behind it at the doorway stood another dark shadow. It surged past us and over my desk towards the old chief's office as well. I shouted after it in vain and heard a loud slam in response. I searched around again for my Glock, but I couldn't find it. And I couldn't get to my knife either with my arm pinned. What I did spot was that in all of the commotion, I hadn't noticed that my fall had knocked over the rustic grocery cart, spilling its contents onto the station house floor. Amongst the junk, I spotted the axe head I'd noticed earlier, and it was within reach. I slid the nightstick up so that the PR-24 side handle cracked the thing in the face one more time, but then let go of it to reach back for the axe head. Without my hand to hold the baton in the hisser's mouth, it spit it out and reared back again to come back for a bite. But that gave me the opening I needed to bring that axe head up right into its face. The first hit just dazed it again, but the second bit hard into its face as dark red blood oozed out of its mouth. I struck again with everything I had and managed to knock the thing off of me and scrambled to get out from under it. My primary concern was the kid at this point, so I immediately dove to the other side of the cart to get my shotgun, which was on my desk. I landed on my desk in a painful heap and slammed my knee into the corner of it, but I got my hands around the barrel and the stock of my Remington. As I rolled off the desk, I brought my weapon up in the general direction of the old chief's office, where I expected to find at least one of the things already inside. But the door was closed, and only one hisser crouched outside of it, clawing at the door. I didn't want to take the risk of overpenetration, so I strafed across the room to get an angle on the thing that wouldn't be firing into the office. It must have heard me as it spun around and came right at me. I waited until it was close and then unloaded some buckshot right into its skull at a downward angle again to avoid the through and through. The hisser's S-head was just gone, and so was part of its torso, because you know that S-what 12 gauge. Shells do inside 10 feet. I looked up at the door to the office and saw a tall shadow standing on the other side of the window, but then heard a gurgling hiss from behind me. That sounded like the worst thing ever. And when I spun around, that hisser that I'd given a facelift with the axe head was on its feet and lurching toward me. I lined up the shot and hit the thing dead center of mass, sending it sprawling out of the door. I immediately moved to the door of the Chief S office and cautiously turned the doorknob with my non-trigger hand, way they taught us back in training. The light was on and I could see pretty clearly, but I couldn't see the third hisser, and then panicked and aimed for the ceiling only to find nothing there. I called out for the kid, who popped up behind the old chief's desk completely uninjured. I looked around again just for a second to make sure I wasn't missing it, but there wasn't another creature. I told the kid to stay put and closed him inside the office again, then went over to the door to make sure the one I had D-shot was dead before I went upstairs to check for the third one. As I reached the door to the outside, I spotted the hisser I'd shot laying unmoved in the road. I then closed, locked, and bolted the door again and went upstairs to check the second floor for the third one, but there was nothing. When I came back downstairs, I went to the office to check on the kid again, and again he was alone and fine. I had him stay in the office another bit while I dragged the body of the other dead hisser over to the front door to throw it outside. Despite the risk, I did not want this thing inside while I was trying to sleep, and I didn't want to see all the core if I could avoid it. Plus, the thing was heavy as underscore, and it took me a minute just to get it to the door. As far as the third creature was concerned, I had no idea what had occurred and wondered if I just imagined it. It occurred to me upon getting a good look at the body of one of these things, which were jet black by the way, and covered with bony spines, that all I'd seen come through the door was a shadow. I also wondered why the first hisser couldn't get into the office in the first place. It wasn't locked. The door isn't particularly strong, but I think I got my answer when I opened the door to throw the body outside. After checking for more of them thoroughly, I rolled the body of the headless hisser out the front door to collapse onto his underscore comrade. When I looked up from the two cadavers, I spotted movement further in the street and raised my shotgun up to drop another one before it became a problem, but there was no need. The figure that stood out in the street wasn't a bloodthirsty monster after all, but a familiar shape that I'd seen earlier, and it tipped its tray on her hat at me once again before vanishing into the rest of the shadows of Shady Oaks. Now, hell, I knew two things instinctively at that moment. That this guy, whoever or whatever he was, wasn't out to get me. It was like the opposite of alarm bells going off in my mind. He didn't mean any harm, and in fact, he meant quite the opposite. Honestly, it was the same feeling as when I DB on call alone, and another officer responded as well. Like I suddenly wasn't alone out here in the underscore. I locked up everything again, pretty shook at it all, and then I went back to the office. I talked to the kid for a minute and tried to calm him down as best as I could. But he was scared too because, of course he was. I got out of him that his name was Jeremy and that he'd come back to the square to give me a bullet since I'd helped him and his friends by giving up mine. It was an old .38 round that might work in that Winchester if I could ever get it out of the cage. I thanked him for the bullet, but kind of read him the riot act for going far from shelter anywhere near dark. Then I fed him a little bit of what I had gotten in the station house, which wasn't much, but he seemed to enjoy the pumpkin seeds. Tried to get him set up in the other of the two cells to get some rest, but we were both kind of awake. So I made another pot of coffee, pulled out a deck of cards that I'd found a couple of days back. I'd planned on using them for trade, but was glad to have them now. I got him talking, and he explained that his folks had died when they arrived in Shady Oaks after dark, and that Matthew and the others had found him and taken him in. He helped me pick up all the stuff that had fallen out of the shopping cart, and told me that the mask, which freaked me out, was apparently an effigy. That's my word. Not his, of something he and the rest of the clan called the Green Man of the Oak, which with everything else going on around here, just sounds _great. I resolved to take Jeremy back to his clan at the storage facility in the morning, and get some answers from Matthew when I did. But for now though, the kid's asleep in the cell that I was using for a bedroom, so I'm going to try and catch some shut-eye at my desk with my shotgun aimed right at them.